CBS News Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett has covered Donald Trump since the early days of the 2016 election. He's covered dozens of campaign rallies, debates, and now the Trump White House. He's compiled his experiences in a new book. I spoke with him earlier about Mr. Trump's wild ride. The prologue of your book is called What I Should Have Learned. Interesting. You write about interviewing Donald Trump in the spin room after a GOP debate in South Carolina in January of 2016. Let's go ahead and play a clip of that moment.
And then you are president, but you tell the Trump chancellor.
Today we saw.
You don't take it.
Mr. Trump.
He's terrible. You are terrible.
That is not
You are really
You don't
terrible.
mean that. You don't
go ahead.
mean
No,
that.
I do mean it.
No, you don't mean
I think
that.
you're very unprofessional, but go ahead.
No, New York value.
All right, pretty tough exchange there. What do you think you should have learned from that exchange?
So here's what I didn't know about Donald Trump until that moment. What we have to understand is just before that, about a week before, 3 or 4 days, give or take, whatever, for the first time, he went after me on his Twitter feed. Said I was a biased agenda reporter. That, of course, blew up my Twitter feed, as it blew up everyone's Twitter feed who covered Donald Trump, then the candidate. I didn't respond on Twitter, just let it go. And then I didn't know what this encounter would be the next time. So every other time after a debate, when Donald Trump came down the row, he would stop and talk, and we would have an exchange. This time he gives me the Heisman. He fronts me off. So you have to decide, what are you going to do? Well, the thing I learned is, and I didn't know it fully until that moment, you have to stand your ground, know why you're there, tell him he doesn't believe what he's saying, because I knew he didn't believe it. I knew it was all an act. Just to test. Why are you here? What are you doing? And I just kept saying, you don't believe it. You don't believe that. And he's like, all right.
And he took your question.
You know why you're here. Let's go.
And so from that point forward.
The negotiation never ends. The testing is relentless and continuous. But if you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, you will earn a modicum of respect.
Let's talk about your book broadly. Instead of focusing on sort of the palace intrigue or internal politics, your book centers on what actually happened during President Trump's first year in office. And you talk about how Neil Gorsuch's nomination to the Supreme Court was obviously consequential for this president. And it's a fascinating account of the behind the scenes that led up to that moment. Now you have the president attempting to get a second nominee confirmed. But this is, in fact, a moment of crisis, I think it's fair to say, where we're going to be seeing that nominee go up for a second round of hearings next week. What do you think the White House is doing? Do you know what the preparation process now is like, given the atmosphere that exists, such as that is?
Well, number one, the White House is saying, we're with you, but you're on your own. Not, we're not going to support you, but the president has limited political capital and even more limited moral authority on this topic. He was elected despite that lack of moral authority on this topic. What's the topic? Broadly, respect for proper treatment of women. He doesn't have it. He was elected despite that. True fact. It's relevant now in the sense that the president's voice in this atmosphere does not help, and it may hurt Brett Kavanaugh. So Kavanaugh will have the support of the White House, but he also knows he has to handle this on his own, and procedurally, Republicans are going to try to keep this as narrow a conversation as possible. 2 witnesses, the accuser and the accused, and leave it at that. And have them battle it out, who's credible, who isn't. The sense the White House has is the partisan dynamic that exists now will exist after. If they hold the Republican votes, Brett Kavanaugh will survive. And as the president said, if we have to wait a little bit, that's fine. They're in a wait-and-see mode because he himself doesn't have anything to offer in this context or in this conversation. And the less he says and the quieter he is on Twitter, the better it will be for Brett Kavanaugh. But to your point,
yeah.
How did we get here? Neil Gorsuch is on the Supreme Court. How did that happen? Well, part of the Brett Kavanaugh story is the deep sense of injustice Senate Democrats have about what happened after Antonin Scalia died. President Obama nominated somebody, Merrick Garland. Did that nominee ever get a hearing? No. Which means if you don't have a hearing, you don't get a vote. The vacancy remains open. The entire story, from the moment of the news bulletin of Antonin Scalia's death and how Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, dealt with that, how he worked with others interested in this issue and had that led up to the Trump election, and then the Neil Gorsuch pick, all in that chapter.
Is it fair to say that based on moves like that, based on Mitch McConnell's ability to hold those Republicans together, does that make him the most powerful person in Washington other than President Trump?
It doesn't make him the most powerful person, but it makes him a significant figure and one that the White House has to vector off of and understand. And there were moments when the relationship between Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump got very volatile in the summer of 2017. I talk about that. Now, despite that volatility, no one is more reliant upon the strategy and the success of Mitch McConnell than President Trump. That's how things work in politics. And Donald Trump as president is learning that. The whole point of the Gorsuch chapter, health care, why didn't it work, tax cuts, tax reform, why did it work, is to say this about the Trump presidency. It's volatile, it's traumatic, it's unpredictable. It creates a sense of anxiety, even for people who love and support Donald Trump, because they don't know what's coming next. But it is real, and it is ever present, and it is churning. What is it churning out? What is it creating? What is going to be left behind when Donald Trump leaves the stage, as inevitably he must? I don't know when that's going to be, but he's not going to be president forever, obviously. The book is about what I think, and most people who I've spoken to think, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, are going to be whether we like it or not. And I don't put my thumb on the scale. This is not a like, not like book. What's going to be here? And what are we going to look back and say, you know, that happened because of Trump? Well, I think that's a pretty rich topic, and that's why I wrote about it.
So let's talk about one of the sections in your book that you just mentioned, the tax cuts. You write that depending on the long-term economic performance of the tax cuts, quote, this could be one of the most dubious achievements of Trump's first year. Why do you say that?
Because there are deficit implications that will come with this tax cut, because the tax cut, as everyone knows, was not just the only act dealing with fiscal policy in the country. Everyone knew eventually there was going to be another spending deal, and yes, there was. And what did it do? What Washington typically does, spends more on defense and spends more on non-defense. You couple those two things together, even with a robust economy, there are deficit implications. We're already seeing numbers that are approaching $1 trillion annually. There are those in the president's camp that say, yeah, but the economy is also larger, so as a percentage of GDP, it's not that scary. Maybe yes, maybe no. But we still have the entitlement accounts that are due to the baby boomers who are now retiring in larger and larger numbers. We have these obligations. Servicing the debt never gets less expensive. It can maintain or it can become more expensive. It's an achievement. It's there and it's not going away. And Republicans intentionally made the individual tax cuts temporary to weaponize them politically to keep voting on that again, which they've already begun to do. The corporate tax cuts are permanent. Has any Democrat said we've got to get rid of those? Maybe some, but nowhere near the numbers needed to repeal them, so they're going to be with us for a while. So the economic effect, the deficit effect, the debt effect will be with us for a very long time. And if it all works out and this elaborate exercise in cutting taxes and using economic growth to hold down deficits succeeds, that will be a legacy of itself. If it doesn't, and the deficit explodes, and interest rates rise, and things get squeezed in unpredictable ways, and the volatility affects the economy in a negative way, that's a legacy too. And Trump will own either side of that himself.
Do you think that the president has left his mark on the office of the presidency overall because of or in spite of this wild ride that you described throughout the book?
The safe answer is both. It also happens to be the correct answer. Because every president matters, and as I say in the book early on, every president, even the ones we regard as more failure than not, have their successes. And even great presidencies have their failures. It's all about the totality. Well, there's a lot of totality where Donald Trump is concerned. There's just a lot to measure and a lot to weigh. But because he had the most conservative Congress in modern American history, a much more Reagan-infused Congress than even the Congress Ronald Reagan dealt with when he was president. He was able to move things forward on the judiciary, deregulation, and taxes that are long-term legacy items. And the country will deal with them and is dealing with them and will continue to deal with them. So he's left his mark. I think he would like to leave a different mark than he's left so far on military and strategic policy. But I talk about two areas where he's already changed the American approach. One is to the Middle East and one is to North Korea.
The book is about the most significant moments of President Trump's first year in office, and it's coming out almost at the end of his second year. Do you think that we're not going to fully be able to grasp what has happened in 2018 until the end of 2019?
I think that's possible. I mean, I really do think, I'll say this on my behalf, this book is like a fine wine. It's only going to get better. This book is only going to get better and more relevant with each and every passing day, because what happened and why, attributed on the record, no blind quotes in this book, no speculation. This book is actually what happened and why, and the underlying forces behind it. Why is Jeff Sessions still the Attorney General? Read the chapter on Jeff Sessions. You'll learn why. You haven't seen it before. Why did health care fail? There's a lot of reasons, and it's not just John McCain. And the lessons learned from that and where health care exists in this country as a result of that is also told in this book. What does Trump mean about race in this country? I tackled that. You think that was an easy chapter to write? Not at all. But it's fairly drawn, and 5, 10, 15 years from now, people will go reach back for that book and say, oh yeah, that happened then, and here's why it happened. And that's what I'm most proud of.
Major Garrett, thank you.
Thank you.